How many of you are familiar with the name Eric B. Hare? That ring a bell? Yeah? A few hands going up. For some of you who have by this point accumulated a few years of life experience, and if you've grown up in the Adventist church, you might recognize the voice, in some cases more than you might recognize the name. Born in 1894, Hare was a prolific writer of articles, also the author of 6 books. He died in 1982, and here's a picture of him, except I don't have a screen that I can see. Is there a screen behind me that you can see? Is there anything on that screen? So this is going to be problematic when I can't see what's on that screen. So do we know how to turn that on? That one? Or I could stretch my back. All right. I have a high likelihood of getting lost at this point. So that's a picture of him. From 1915 to 1934, he and his family served as missionaries in Burma, or what we know now as the country of Myanmar. He later served in a number of leadership roles. He was a Sabbath school director for the Southeastern California Conference, and then he was a youth director for the Pacific Union, and then finally he was the associate Sabbath school director for the General Conference of the Adventist Church. But most people don't remember that stuff because what he was best known as and what he is most remembered for is being a master storyteller, particularly of children's stories, and particularly mission stories. He thrilled children at summer camps and camp meetings for years with his mission stories. And even though he's passed away, you can still buy CDs of his stories from the Adventist Book Center, some of his greatest stories. I think it was my mother-in-law who gave Darren, when he was just very small, for a gift of 4 cassette tapes. Do you know what cassette tapes are? These things with, talk to some old person and they can explain that if you've never heard of them. Cassette tapes of Eric B. Hare, some of his most memorable stories. And so our kids in our house have grown up hearing those stories, and we've heard those stories over and over again, and we have learned to love them. So just recently, I learned something I thought was quite interesting about one of those great stories. So the next day after I learned that, I asked my kids to get out those tapes, because in our house we still have the facilities to be able to play tapes and listen to them. Kind of in the antique section of our house, I guess. And while we were eating supper, I had them play a specific story, and that was the story, the classic, The Big Yellow Truck. Ever heard that story, The Big Yellow Truck? And then after we listened to it, I told my kids, you will never guess what Mom and I learned about this story. Anyways, today I want to share some stories about how God works in people's lives, how he's worked in people's lives in the past, and how he continues to work in people's lives in the present. And so I would like us to start with a story. You might be saying, hey, there is no children's story. Ugh. Well, relax. We get a children's story. We're all going to get a children's story. So be at peace. Now, we're going to start with the story of the Big Yellow Truck. Now, Pastor Hare's storytelling style, if you haven't heard him before, is unique. And for some folks, at first, they even find his storytelling style a bit distracting. But I can tell you, trust me, that after you listen to a few of his stories, you get hooked and you love it. So if it's new to you, if it's old to you, let's listen to the story of the Big Yellow Truck.
Once upon a time, not very long ago, away over in Ceylon, we built a Christian school at the Lakbahana mission station. But the village people nearby were not friendly. And in one village they said, we wish you hadn't built your old school so near to us. And in the other village they said, you needn't think we'll ever send any of our children to your old school. Now on that mission station there was a big yellow truck. It was used to bring supplies from a big town 12 miles away. And that big town had the sweetest name. It was called Candy. And the children of the teachers just loved to ride to Candy in the big yellow truck. One day, Brother Jurians, the principal of the Lakbahana school, came running into the house and said, Mother, would you and the children like to come for a ride to town in the big yellow truck? "Oh, yes," said Mother. "Oh, yes, oh, yes, oh, yes," chorused the three older children with excitement. Even the baby seemed to know that there was some big treat coming, for though she wasn't big enough to talk or walk yet, she waved her arms and legs and cooed and cooed. "All right, get ready then," said Daddy. "Brother De Silver and I have to go to town for supplies, and he is taking his wife and family too." There were squeals of delight as the children got ready and scrambled into the big yellow truck. "Just a moment, Father, while I get the baby's bottle ready," said Mother. "It's time for her to eat, and she can enjoy her milk as we jog along the road." In just a moment, Mother climbed in. Brother Jurien stepped on the starter, the engine began to rumble, and the big yellow truck, filled with happy children laughing and singing, started off. Down the side of the hill, through the coconut palms, and past the school building it went. "Goodbye, goodbye," called the children as they waved to some of the students at work in the garden. "Goodbye, goodbye," they replied. "Have a good time." Then out of the gate onto the road went the big yellow truck with the happy children laughing and singing. The baby was hungry, so Mother cuddled the little one into her arms and let her enjoy her milk from the bottle. The big yellow truck jogged merrily along the road, through the village where the people said, "We wish you hadn't built your old school so close to us," and through the other village where the people said, "You needn't think we'll ever send our children to your old Christian school." And the children were laughing and singing, and the baby kept on drinking her milk from its bottle. The big yellow truck jogged along and jogged along, around the corner, over the bridge, and down the little hill to another little corner. But just as they went around that little corner, they were horrified to see a great big passenger bus right in front of them. There was no time to stop. There was no room to pass it. There was only time for Brother Juriens to choose between hitting the bus head-on or going off the road down the steep embankment 150 feet high. The children screamed as they saw the big yellow truck turn sharply off the road, then held their breath as they felt the truck plunging down the side of the embankment, engine first. Bumpety, 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 bump, bump, down, 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 over the small bushes and trees and rocks it went. For a moment the children were all squashed up on top of each other. Then suddenly, with an extra big bump, the big yellow truck came to rest. Brother Jurien jumped out of the cab and ran around to the back of the truck, his face as white as a sheet. "Are you all alive?" he cried. "I think so," said Mother feebly. "I am, and I am," said each one of the children as they realized that the danger was over. The baby thought it was all a big game. She laughed and cooed and kept on drinking her milk out of the bottle. "Just think, we came down that 150-foot embankment and didn't even turn over," said Brother De Silver. "And there are only a few small dents on the front fenders," said Brother Juriens. "Do you know, I think the little bushes and the little trees that we came over must have helped to hold us back a little." "Yes, I do too," said Brother De Silver. But Mother said, "Do you know what I think? I think the angels must have held us up in their hands. That's what I think. And so do I. And so do I. And so do I," said each of the children. Then everybody was quiet for a little while, for you're always quiet when you know real angels are close by. By this time, the passenger bus had stopped on the side of the road just around the corner. The men were sure everybody in the big yellow truck had been killed, so they came scrambling down the embankment to pick up the dead bodies. But when they saw the big yellow truck still right side up, still standing on its own four wheels, with only a few little dents in the front fenders, and everybody alive, and the baby still drinking its milk. They said, "It's a miracle, it's a miracle. Your God must be a strong God. Your God is a good God, and your God is with you. It's a miracle, it's a miracle. If our bus had gone down this embankment, we all would have been killed." On looking around, they found that they were in a little garden among some coconut palms, about 10 feet from a river. There was a garden road not far away, and the men all pushed a little and pulled a little, and soon the big yellow truck was pulled up onto the road. Then the children all scrambled in. Brother Jurian stepped on the starter, and the old yellow truck rumbled and rumbled, and jogged along and jogged along, through the garden and up the hill and onto the road. Then away it went, around the corner and down the hill and across the river, through another village and up another little hill, all the way to Candy. And the children laughed and sang, and thanked God for the miracle. At last, the supplies were all bought and packed on the truck. The children climbed in and sat on top of the supplies, and off went the big yellow truck, down the hill and through the village, across the river and up the hill and around the corner, and past the place where they'd had the accident. But the story had gone before them. And when they came to the village where the people said, "You needn't think we will ever send our children to your school," the people came running out and waved their hands and said, "Wait a minute! We want to see the big yellow truck. We've heard what your God has done for you. Your God is a good God. Your God is with you. We want to send our children to your school now." And when they came to the village where the people said, "We wish you hadn't built your old school so close to us," the people came running out and waved and said, "Wait a minute! We want to see the big yellow truck. We've heard what your God has done for you. Your God is a good God, and He is with you. We are glad now that you are living near us." And when they came to the students working in the school garden, the students waved and said, "Did you have a good time?" And the children said, "We surely did. We surely did. And we had a miracle." And everybody was happy.
All right, good story. So Sandra and I were amazed to discover that someone from our own Willowdale congregation is actually prominently featured in that story. We're like, what? Somebody from the big yellow truck story is here? And when I say that you would never guess who from here was who in that story, I mean, unless you already happen to know, you will never guess who from here was who in that story. And we also learned from that individual that there is the rest of the story. There's more to it than what we heard. So at this time, I'm inviting our surprise Willowdale celebrity to come out here and share with you the rest of that miracle story.
Story. Wait a minute. You don't have. If you heard that story before, that's not good. Somebody who hasn't heard the story before. Yes, I was the baby. My parents have to repeatedly reassure me that I was actually born a boy. Actually, my parents are here today. If they could just stand up. They're at the back there. It's my mother and my father, Pastor Eric Jurians and my mother Joyce Jurians. My father's 93, my mother's 90. They celebrated earlier this year their 70th wedding anniversary.
Amen. Amen.
And of course, that's my dad there in the picture. I guess you can see it there. It's clearer over here, but that picture actually was in the archives at Andrews University's library, and I think it was my niece who was there one day, and someone in the library was talking to her and mentioned about this and didn't have any idea that it was had anything to do with the Jurian's family, and she said to them, "Well, that's my grandfather." So it was sort of a surprise. So yes, so the rest of the story. So actually this occurred in a country where I was born, Ceylon as it was called then. It's now Sri Lanka. And in Ceylon, Sri Lanka today, there's two groups of people you're probably aware of. And the native people, the Sinhalese, are Buddhist, and the Tamils are Hindu. And actually, every year there's in Kandy, and that's spelt with a K, by the way, Kandy. We had a school. My father was the principal of the school. It's called Lakpahana Training Institute at that time, and it's still there is a school there, an Adventist school there. The closest town, 20 kilometers away, was Kandy, and every year they have this celebration where they parade around what is an emblem of the tooth of the Buddha, and Buddhists from all over the world come and visit there. There's parades, they have elephants that are decorated, they have special dancers, and people, flock to the city, and it's very crowded. And so it goes on in the months of July and August, and it's a daily ritual where they parade through the streets with the elephants and the dancers and the revelry. There's fireworks, etc. So one day, my father, I said, was a principal, and there was only one vehicle that we had that was available there. I was about 10 months old, and they needed to have some supplies, and so when my mother heard that, she said, we have to go to Kandy to get these supplies. So the tarpaulin, which you see on the truck there, was actually in for repairs, but because it looked like it was going to rain, they tossed it on top of the truck, and a couple of the teachers and 3 of their children, and then my parents, myself in the front, and the other 3 of my brothers and sisters, the 3 children and the 2 adults, were in the back of that. And of course, in those days, we didn't have any rules that existed with respect to seat belts. They didn't even exist back then. And so can you imagine 2 adults and 6 children piled in the back there loosely. So they went up, and during that time Ceylon had a double monsoon, so lots of rain every day for periods of time, and this was the monsoon season. Between the school and Kandy is a river, and it's in a mountainous region, and the river, because of the monsoon season, was raging, right? So it was called Mahavali Ganga, which translates to the Big Sand River. It's the biggest river in Sri Lanka. And as I said, it's a mountainous region. Being a British colony at the time, we drove on the other side of the road, and the steering wheel, of course, is on the right-hand side, and you're driving on the left. So as we're going along the road here, there's many hairpin turns, and the mountains on the right, and my father's driving on the left-hand side of the road, right next to the precipice. Came around the last hairpin turn, this bus, which was loaded with people who were returning from the Parahera, which is the celebration, lost control and came into our lane and struck the right fender, and immediately the truck leaped over the side of the road going straight down. And as that happened, my mother yelled out, "God save us." And instead of it actually being 150 feet, it was 200 feet, almost on a straight incline down. So it's very, very sharp incline. And as it neared the bottom, and here the river is in flood, the truck came through and hit a boulder, which I would say was about this height, and you could put your arms around it, and it was pretty well the only boulder that was around that was that size, struck the boulder, and the truck stopped. My mother tells me that when that happened, all of the 8 people in the back came forward and slammed into the back of the cab. Now, my mother was unable, my father got out immediately and went around, and the 8 people in the back were all fine. They weren't injured at all. No scratches, no bruises, nothing was wrong with them. They all got out of the vehicle in the back. My father was with them there. But my mother was unable to get out. She was holding me, and the truck was at such on a steep incline that she was practically standing up. And she had me. The door was a bit damaged because of what had taken place, and so she was unable to get out. At that point in time, the truck came loose and headed straight for the river. So we're now only about 25 feet away from the river. But instead of going straight down and into the river, it just suddenly veered off to the right and struck a tree, and as was stated there, just a few feet from the water's edge, and didn't enter into the water. And then, my father came and rescued my mother and myself. It's not accurate in the story that the truck could be driven away. There was no roadway out of there, and in fact, it was where this happened was actually in a graveyard. It was a cemetery being used by the local people for burying their dead. And it is true, though, that they did say that if it had been them going over that precipice, they said they would have all died, and it was clear that it was our God that had saved us. No question about that. Now, it's a story which is an amazing story. I consider it to be two miracles that happened that day, not just one. And it's the 8 people that were in the back. Nobody was injured. My mother, me, we weren't injured. My father was fine. So eventually they had to have a large crane come and drag the truck back up. I can tell you that God has played miraculous parts in my life. It's not the only miracle that's happened to me. My life has been saved on more than one occasion, even since then. As most recently in 2007 during my surgery when I suffered from a malady and I ended up being on life support overnight. But God is good, and there's no doubt that He has plans for all of us if we just follow His will.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Keith. He's grown up from a little milk-sucking little girl to a fine man, isn't he? Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Of course, now with his celebrity status, if you want to get a picture with him or get his autograph, we'll try to arrange some kind of a time when you can do that. But it's an amazing story, isn't it, really? And to hear the rest of the story is even more amazing. And it's encouraging, I think, to our faith when we hear stories of how God works in people's lives, especially when it's someone you know. That really makes it extra special. It gives us all the more reason to praise the Lord. Now, 4 weeks ago, it was my intention to share with you some stories of God's working in the lives of some Adventist Christian brothers and sisters who we met on our vacation in the country of Georgia, the homeland of our son Darren, where he was born. And you cannot imagine how many things conspired against me the week before that Sabbath to prevent me from ultimately sharing what I really had most wanted to share that day. I covered a little more ground in the second service than I did in the first, but much of the story that I meant to tell was left untold. So I am going to today attempt a sequel. All right, this will be the last sequel, so don't worry, it won't be a never-ending series. But I'm not going to tell you any more about any escapades that we had either in Georgia or Greece. I rather want to tell you the stories of some of the inspiring stories of some of the Adventist Christians that we met in Tbilisi at the Philadelphia Adventist Church, which you're seeing. There's one half of it, there's the other half. This is one of 2 Georgian-speaking congregations in that capital city, and it's one of only 8 total Adventist congregations in the entire country. So let me reintroduce you to some of the people I want to talk about and tell their story today, and then I'm going to get right at it, all right? But just sometimes it's nice if you can hear a voice and see a face. So
there's Arena. She's our tour guide.
And she lives right beside us.
And
there's Arena with us in Old Tbilisi, and a few more folks.
Gamarjoba to everybody. Gamarjoba. Okay.
Hello. There's a good smile. Okay. Oh, Gamarjoba to the people in Toronto. All right, this is the pastor's family at the church we went to in Georgia.
2, 3. Here we go. And 1, 2, 3, go.
Okay, now wait, you need to say hello. Okay, we're going to start here. You need to say, Gamarjoba, my name is...
Gamarjoba, my name is Darren.
Okay.
Gamarjoba, my name is Allah.
Allah?
Gamarjoba, my name is Helen.
Helen? Ellen?
Helen.
Gamarjoba, my names are Irma and Helen.
And Ellen. And Gamarjoba, my name is Sarah. Sarah. And how about this person down here?
Gamarjoba, my name is Alal.
Godsoe, my name is Mate.
Gamarjoba, my name is Mari.
Mary.
Gamarjoba, my name is Tina.
Tina. And this is mom. This is mom here. All right. Hello to Toronto. Okay. All right. So last time I told you a bit of the story of Mate Gavinianidze, who is a recently retired professional soccer player who left his successful career a year ago at the age of 27. And you can see there he's got the red band on his arm, which means that he is the captain. So he's a good soccer player. But he left his career because he chose to follow God's call to become a practicing Seventh-day Adventist Christian. And if you were here 4 weeks ago, you got to see Darren wearing the actual authentic Georgian Football Federation national team uniform that Mate very graciously gave Darren as a gift, socks and all, as hard as it was to get those socks on. In my opinion, this is hands down the coolest souvenir that we have ever brought back from a vacation. So Darren wanted to be able to play soccer with this soccer player, and he wanted to show this, so we're going to show it without the sound, so you can see. They had no soccer ball at their house. We went to their house in another city. They had no soccer ball, so they had to play soccer with a beach ball. So this is Mate and his wife Mari and my kids having a serious soccer game. So I told you how Mate's oldest sister had given him a Bible and a book. I can't remember if it was the book Steps of Christ or the Desire of Ages, and how he would take those books with him everywhere he traveled as a young professional soccer player, when he was in hotels, wherever he was. He played for professional teams in Moscow and then Munich and finally in the Ukraine. And as he would read the Bible, and as he would read that book, he says that he kept sensing God's voice calling to him and telling him, Mate, this is truth that you are reading. The life that you are living right now is not your life. It's not the life that I have in mind for you. Mate, this is not who you really are. And he had this sense that God was calling him. And even though he was busy with his career and his young life, he kept praying for God to lead him as he would read the Bible. And eventually he made the decision to set aside his professional career and answer God's call, answer God's leading. Are they almost done here? I think they're almost done. And that lady right there that just intercepted the game, I'm going to talk about later, and that is Irma. That is a sister. And these are some other ladies who are Irma's friends, who are members of the church there as well. So I think they're about to be done. There. They are done. Mate said, I'm tired. I'm going to sweat. So let's stop the game. So he made the decision. He wanted to be a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, not wanting his wife Mari to make the decision to be baptized and become a Seventh-day Adventist Christian just because he was planning to do so. He encouraged her to study for herself, determine for herself if it was a decision she also wanted to make. And praise God, this couple who had only been married, I think, for less than a year at that time, they studied independently. They both independently and then jointly made the decision, and they were baptized together by Pastor Grisha Samalashvili, who that's his wife, and his daughter is not his son in that picture. His son is not in that picture. But let me go back and tell you a little bit about how God helped Mate, because we just heard of a story of 2 miracles. I want to look at different types of miracles that happen. God does different types. And Mate is fully convinced that in this case, God miraculously helped him. As a young man beginning his professional soccer career at the age of 17, Mate lived a pretty clean lifestyle. He didn't smoke, he didn't drink, he didn't do any of that stuff. He mostly just focused on playing soccer well, because that's what he wanted to do. But now, as a young man, he goes and he's signed on with this team in Moscow. He's now living on his own for the first time in his own apartment. And his new teammates and his new friends there in Moscow, they introduced him to other aspects of life, like tobacco and alcohol. And even while he started using alcohol and eventually developed a pack-a-day smoking habit, he credits God with blessing him with naturally good physical condition. He recognizes now that he trained hard, he worked hard, and yet he was also doing a lot of unhealthy things that wasn't helping his body, and yet he was often rated to have the best conditioning of anyone on his team. So he gives God credit for blessing him with just a strong, healthy body. But while he was seriously contemplating fully following Christ, he came to the realization that those were things he would need to leave behind. That wasn't really going to be pleasing to God. And so he told me that with God's help, it wasn't easy, but he was able to stop drinking without too much difficulty. He was able to put alcohol aside, but smoking was another matter. And as I mentioned last time, you have to understand that Georgia has one of the highest smoking rates for men in all of the world. Most Georgian men die between the ages of 50 and 60 from smoking. When we were up in Zugdidi, I riding around all day with this tour guide and trying to think of stuff to talk about. And I asked him, what about elderly people? What do you have here for elderly people? Do you have nursing homes or, how do you take care of them? And his reply was, it really wasn't an issue because by 65, all the men are dead. You don't have to put them in a nursing home, they're done. Really old Georgian men are pretty rare, sadly. Literally smoke themselves to death. So it's a big deal there. So Mate knew he should stop smoking, but he was struggling. He wasn't finding it as easy to do. And then when they found out that his wife Mari was pregnant, they were wise enough to realize that it was probably not healthy for him to be smoking around her with a little baby growing in her womb. And so he would either go out on the balcony to smoke or he would go to their bathroom and sit on the toilet and smoke. That's where he did it, to be away from her. Well, late one evening, after they'd already gone to bed, he got up to use the washroom, and while he was in there, he decided, well, I might as well have a smoke. And so he began smoking. He was sitting there, and as he did, he said it was just like a great battle began to rage in his mind. And he said it was like there was a voice that was just saying to him, you cannot give this up. You cannot do it, and you will never be able to do it. You will not conquer this habit. And then he said it was like there was another voice in his mind that was saying, you want to give up smoking, but you can't do it. You can't do it on your own. You're going to need help to be able to do it. And so he was sitting there smoking. He didn't want to smoke, but he was smoking, and he was wrestling in his mind. It was a very intense, very emotional experience for him. The battle raged on. It left him feeling very troubled. Frankly, he felt overwhelmed, completely overwhelmed with this sinking reality that there was no way he was ever going to be able to conquer this powerful hold that tobacco had on him. And so he stayed in there for quite a while, wrestling in his mind. Finally, he went back to bed with tears in his eyes. And he lay there on his bed and continued to wrestle with his thoughts, praying to God, weeping and begging God, asking the Lord for help. And eventually he went to sleep. So it was near the end of the next day in the evening when his wife Mari asked him, aren't you forgetting something? Isn't that a scary question when your wife says, aren't you forgetting something? Oh my goodness, talk about a cold chill going down your spine. But anyway, she said, aren't you forgetting something? And at first, he didn't know what in the world she was talking about. But then he suddenly realized that he hadn't smoked all day. He hadn't even had a desire to smoke all day. He could hardly believe it. But he thought, well, I'm tired. Maybe that's just a strange day. Is that really going to happen the next day? But the next day, it was the same thing. Didn't smoke, had no desire to smoke. But he realized that the real test would come the following day after that, for on that day he had an appointment to get together with a few of his friends, and of course his friends were Georgian men, and if they're Georgian men, that meant that they would be smoking. And he wondered, how is this going to work? Am I going to be able to hold up while I'm spending time with them and they're smoking all around me? And so he prayed to God, he asked for strength, and he was quite worried about what would happen. He met with his friends. Of course, they started smoking, but he didn't smoke. In fact, he didn't even have a desire to smoke. And his friends were absolutely astonished. They were amazed. They were like, whoa, Mate, you quit smoking? How did you do that? And in the coming weeks, they realized that this was a permanent change, and they insist to him that it is because he is such a strong man and he has such strong willpower. They say, Mate, you are one of the most amazing people we know, that you can just stop smoking like that. And Mate just as vehemently asserts to them that he does not have that much willpower. It is not because he is a strong man. It is that he has only been able to quit because it has been God who has helped him and given him the strength. So he goes back and forth with his friends. They say, no, you're just a strong guy. And he says, no, my God is strong. And I wish you could hear him tell this story. I wish you could see the enthusiastic expression on his face as he testifies about this miracle. He calls it his miracle that God did for him in his life. God does all kinds of different miracles, doesn't he? Behind Mate's story is another story of God's leading, which I think is also really a miracle story, and I think it's just as remarkable. We spent a day and a half in Mate and Mari's very beautiful country home in a town north of Tbilisi. And at Mate's insistence, we were privileged to hear his oldest sister, Irma, tell her inspiring story. So this is Irma here, Mate, Mari, this is Mom, Tina, this is their baby, Sarah. These are a couple of friends from the church. These are somebody from Canada. Those other two. So her story. When Irma was just about 12 years old, a Christian neighbor, a Baptist neighbor, invited her, maybe her whole family, to attend church with them. And Irma had always, even as a little girl, been interested in spiritual things. She was always interested in what does the Bible say? What does it teach? Ever since she was a little girl. So she was very happy for this invitation. She attended church with them from time to time, and they were kind enough to share with her a precious gift. You know what that gift was? Yeah, a Bible. They gave her a Bible. Young girl, 12 years old. And so as she grew up through the years, from a young girl into a teenager and into a young adult, she kept reading the Bible. And especially as she got older and was reading the Bible, she eventually developed a list of questions that she had regarding what the Bible taught. And so she was interested in visiting and attending any Christian church she heard of. If she ever heard of a Christian group somewhere, she would go visit there. And as she got older, that when she would go visit those churches, she would take her list of questions. And so, she wouldn't barge in the door and say, I've got some questions, but, she would go worship with them a little bit. And then, as she got to know someone or talk to the pastor or something, she'd say, well, I have some questions I wonder about. And she would ask them questions like, what about the Sabbath? When is the Sabbath, and when should we observe it? And she would ask them questions like, what happens when somebody dies? She would ask them questions like, what about, the Bible talks about these foods, these meats that are unclean. What about that? And when she didn't get an answer that matched what she had studied in the Bible, then she would move on. She would say, this is not the place for me. I mean, she didn't leave in a huff or something like that, but she would just say, no, this is not where I'm going to stay. She enjoyed the Christian fellowship, but she wasn't satisfied to settle in a church that didn't teach what she had read and understood the Bible to teach. Now, while Georgia was the second country in the world to officially adopt Christianity as a nation back in the early 300s AD, Christianity there it's an Orthodox Christianity. Is quite different from what I'm used to, day-to-day Christian life, and maybe what you're used to. The overwhelmingly dominant Christian presence is the Georgian Orthodox Church. This is their main and biggest Cathedral, whatever it is. That's like their head place. It's a beautiful building, imposing building. But most Georgians are Georgian Orthodox Christians. The nationality and the religion are so intertwined, they're basically one and the same. To be Georgian is to be Orthodox. And from what I can see, it's a Christianity comprised mostly of ritual. You know, they've got little churches, huge churches, in-between churches, old churches, new churches. They all have this similar certain Georgian style with these arched roofs inside, frescoes on them. When people stop by churches with these high dome roofs, they usually pay a little bit of offering, maybe buy some candles, light a candle or two, buy a little card of Mary or of some icon, kiss the wall of the church on the way in or the way out or both. Many of them will go around and kiss the different pictures in the church, the different pictures of the icons, and then go on their merry way. At certain times in a day, a bell will be rung and a priest or a monk will chant something for a while, maybe wave around some incense, possibly interspersed with a small group of musicians performing some songs. But people don't come and come to worship. They kind of pop in, spend a minute or two, leave some change, drop a few kisses, which is kind of interesting, all these people kissing these walls and pictures. And then they go. And some of those who are most devout stop regularly. Many of them will fast from meat maybe during certain seasons of the year. But that's kind of how it is. Christianity doesn't seem to impact day-to-day life too much. Just a brief 2-3 minutes and on with your day. So most other Christian groups there, most other religious groups are quite small and very much in the background of society. So while Irma and Mati grew up in the Georgian Orthodox home, as Irma got older and as she kept reading the Bible, she would seek out any Christian group that she could find. And Irma told me that she must have visited basically every non-Orthodox Christian church and group in Tbilisi, a large city of several million people, except for the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which she had never heard about. And she was determined, as she got older, that she was going to keep searching until she found a church that followed what the Bible taught, until she found a church that, matched what she read in the Bible. And she got to the point where she had said to herself in her mind, I'm going to keep searching, but if I can't find one, I'm going to start my own church. I'm going to start my own denomination because I want to follow the Bible. So she had got to that point. Now, Irma is a gifted artist. She creates beautiful paintings, very, very lovely painter. So one day when she was about 24 years of age, she had arranged to go and visit an older gentleman who is a painter, and she had always admired his painting. Apparently he had a unique style or technique or something, and she always admired that. And so she had made arrangements with him if she could come and observe him painting so she could watch what he did and learn some of his techniques and stuff like that. So she made those arrangements. The day came, she went there, and she was there watching him paint. And while she was there was a knock at the man's door. And so the artist excused himself to go answer the door, and then he invited in the man who had knocked at the door. Turns out it was a Seventh-day Adventist man who had stopped by to do a Bible study with the artist. Now, Irma had no idea this was going to happen. She knew nothing about this. She had just made an arrangement to come on a certain day. She had no idea this man was even interested in the Bible. And the artist didn't know her very much, so he came and apologized a little bit, explained to Irma that a visitor had stopped to study the Bible. He asked her, do you have any interest in spiritual things? Do you have any interest in Bible study? And she indicated, I definitely do, very much so. So he invited her, well, come join in our Bible study. So she did. She very much enjoyed the study. And when it was over, the man who was leading out told Irma that there was another man who was going to be speaking soon on similar Bible subjects, and that he was a pretty interesting speaker. And he invited her and asked her, would you like to come and hear his presentation? Well, Irma accepted the invitation, and that is how she came to visit for the first time the Philadelphia Seventh-day Adventist Church in Tbilisi. And it just so happens that that man who was going to be speaking or going to be preaching is the same man who preached on the Sabbath that we worship there 8 weeks ago, which is this man here. He is, I believe, the director of Adventist World Radio for Georgia. He does the radio programs, and he preached the day we were there in Georgian, and the pastor translated for our family in English, which was very kind of him. So Irma said that whenever she visited any of these other Christian churches or groups over the years, she always felt welcome. She was always kindly welcomed as a visitor. But that first time attending the Philadelphia church, she said she just immediately felt completely comfortable, like she was instantly just a part of the church family. In fact, she fit in so well that after the service, some ladies came over and talked to her, and they just assumed that she was a Seventh-day Adventist, maybe from another congregation or visiting. They didn't even have any idea that she was like a first-time visitor. She just seemed to click and fit in so well. So she studied with the people from this church, and she quickly discovered that for the first time, she found the answers to her list of questions that matched what she had read and studied and learned already from her own Bible study. She had finally found the church that she had been looking for her whole life, and now she didn't have to start her own denomination. And thus she made the decision to be baptized. However, all was not rosy. Her parents were extremely upset at the news. Her mother, who you saw there, Tina, was convinced and terrified that her daughter was now going to end up burning in hell for making this decision to leave the Orthodox Church and join this Adventist group. And her father, who was a police officer, was absolutely irate. Things very quickly escalated, and he declared to her that her decision to leave the Orthodox faith was also a decision to abandon her family. And that meant that if she was abandoning her family, that meant she would no longer be welcome to live in the family home. She would no longer be welcome to even visit the family home. So here she is in this situation. She's made a decision to be baptized, but it means getting kicked out of your home. But she had made up her mind. She made the brave decision to follow God, even though it meant being removed from her home. And so she was baptized by Pastor Doug Hart. Pastor Doug Hart is an American pastor married to a Russian wife, and they were there at that time serving as a treasurer of the Georgia Mission. It was Doug and Tanya Hart who were like guardian angels to Sandra and I when we were there trying to adopt Darren. I mean, there was so much stuff going on, and they helped us so much, and they saved us really. And Doug is now serving as the pastor of the International Falls District in Minnesota. But it's interesting how things happen. I realize now that when we were there 12 years ago to get Darren, it was right about that time that Irma had made her decision to be baptized and was making this big life decision about leaving her home. We didn't know her then. We meet her all this time later. But I realize, at that time, probably within a few weeks or at most a few months apart, it was a life-changing, dramatic time for us, and it was a life-changing, dramatic time for her in very different ways. And we met together after all this time. So I thought that was kind of cool. So Irma got kicked out of her house. She moved into a very small, she found a little room, one little room that she could barely afford to live in, and that's where she went to live. And even though she had very little income, it was very difficult living there, very stark circumstances. She said that she remembers that time as being one of the happiest times of her life. Why? Because she said she felt at peace in a way that she had never experienced before in her life. Yeah, she had like nothing. She was scraping by, but she had the wonderful gift of God's peace that He promises when we're following Him. And it was also during that time that young Mate, who was living up in an apartment in Moscow, a young man, a new professional soccer player, he heard about what had happened, and so he had a showdown with his parents. And he said to them, if Irma is no longer welcome in the family home and no longer welcome to come to family events, then I assume that I am no longer welcome in the family home, and you won't see me at any family events. And if she can't come to your house, he said to his parents, then you can't come to my apartment. So he really stood up for her, which was a big deal for her because all of her family kind of turned against her except young Mate, who wasn't an Adventist at all, but he stood up for his big sister. And that was a big thing for her. Well, one day after church during that time, Tanya casually asked Irma how she was managing living on her own. And Irma said she was doing okay, but she confessed that it was difficult. She had very limited resources. And God blessed. Later that day, Doug and Tanya invited Irma to come and live with them, which meant now she would have her own room in a whole home. She could be a part of a family in a secure Christian setting. She was very surprised by the offer, but very happy for the offer. She accepted, and she ended up moving in and living with the Harts for as long as they lived in Georgia. She actually ended up homeschooling their daughter, Nicole, who's just a few months older than Dallin. So God blessed her. It wasn't always easy, but God made provision. And what's interesting, from very early on in Irma's association with the Philadelphia congregation, she asked her brothers and sisters in Christ if they would commit to joining her in praying specifically for her family, praying that her family would embrace the message that she had embraced. And so Irma remained faithful to God through those years, and her church family remained faithful to lift up her family, to pray for her father, who was so mad, to pray for her mother, who was so afraid, pray for her 3 younger sisters, and to pray for her little brother, the professional soccer dude who's starting his career. And so you can imagine the wonderful joy, not only that Irma felt, but that whole little congregation felt when they learned the surprising news that Mate and Mary wanted to be baptized. Can you imagine how that felt for them? Been praying for them for over a decade, and maybe the last ones they would have expected, and then one day they get the news they want to join the church and be baptized. They were in a state of happy shock after 12 years of intercession that Irma's well-known, successful soccer player little brother was choosing to put Jesus first in his life. What a grateful time of rejoicing they experienced. But not everyone was happy. In December, this coming December, Matthew and Mary will celebrate their 2nd wedding anniversary. And if I remember correctly, I think little Sarah also in December turns 1. Or maybe it's next month she turns 1, but something like that. Well, Irma and Mate, they were supposed to be married the summer before the December that they were married, but Mate's father got sick and died that summer, so they ended up delaying their wedding. But it was sad. He remained very much against Irma's decision to be an Adventist throughout the rest of his life. He remained very angry at the church until the time of his death. But now Mate and Mary decided to get baptized, and now it was Mate's mother, Tina, who was not happy. She wasn't angry, she wasn't mad, but she was very worried for them. She thought, oh no, they're making the same poor decision now. My daughter's going to burn in hell, my son is going to burn in hell, my daughter-in-law is going to burn in hell, their baby's going to burn in hell. So it really bothered her, naturally. But they went ahead and got baptized. And then as she observed the positive changes that occurred in the lives of her son and in her daughter-in-law, and as she considered the last number of years of her oldest daughter, Irma, she started to get intrigued. She said, this is kind of interesting, what's happened in some of my kids' lives. And to her credit, she decided that she wanted to study the Bible. And she asked for Bible studies so she could better understand what this was really all about. And a few months later, she too took her stand and was baptized. Isn't that cool? It was another wonderful answer to the faithful and diligent prayers of Irma and her church family. And the deal now is Mate and Mary and Sarah and Irma and Tina, the mom, they all live together. Mate and Mary have this great big huge apartment in Tbilisi. There's room for all of them. And then they have this country home that's even bigger and room for all of them. And there they are, joined together not just in their living arrangements, but joined together in their faith, in their Christian faith. And they, along with the church family, continue to pray for their other 3 sisters that one day they too will, as family members, join the church family. That's what they're praying for. And you would have to meet the Gavinidze family in person to appreciate their passion, their dedicated desire to share this message with the people of their country. Mate especially, this guy is a leader type guy. He is an active guy. He is not one to sit around and do nothing. He wants to do stuff. He wants to find a way to share the truth of the gospel, the truth of this message with his countrymen. So many of them who, in his words, are just blinded by this kind of ritualistic Christianity that they feel comfortable with. And so he is seeking from God and seeking from others, praying that God will use him. And I join in his prayers that God will direct his influence and his energy and his passion to extend God's kingdom in that part of the world. It's amazing what God has done. And I want to pray that God will keep doing miracles in the lives of those people. But I want to tell you about one other dear young adult lady named Irina Masoyan. She was about, and there's just going to be some pictures of us with Irina there. When she was about 6 years old, her mother came across a lady who had set up a little table on the side of the road, which is not that uncommon there in Tbilisi. And on this table, she had put a variety of books like The Desire of Ages and other books like that. Irina's mother always enjoyed reading. She always enjoyed reading particularly history and books about religious subjects. So she stopped and she looked at these books, and they looked kind of interesting to her. So her mother asked the lady, how much are you selling this book for? And she had picked up The Desire of Ages. And the lady at the table told Irina's mother, I'm not selling the book. I'm lending the book. So if you would like to read that book, I'll let you read it. As long as when you're done reading it, please give it back to me. Well, anyways, what developed out of that was a very close friendship. The lady at the table, of course, was a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. This was her way of trying to share her faith. And through that friendship and through the study of the Bible that resulted from that, Irina's mother decided to be baptized and join the church. Now, Irina's father is a Jehovah's Witness, although apparently not a very good one, not a very active one. It seems that his religion doesn't really get in the way of his life too much. And so as Irina grew up, she has a Seventh-day Adventist mom and a Jehovah's Witness dad. And as she looked at the impact that had on both of their lives, she chose to follow and embrace the faith of her mother. And she told us that sometimes she argues with her father, or her father argues with her about her Adventist beliefs, and she just tells him that at least she and her mom know what they believe. They're at least following something. They're following the Bible, and she says, what are you following? He's like, I don't really know. So she points out to him that his lifestyle isn't really any different since he became a Jehovah's Witness from before he was a Jehovah's Witness. So she kind of challenges him with what's the point. And Irina has one younger sister who is married, has a little baby boy. Her sister is one of the very few Seventh-day Adventists who live in the country of Turkey. But Irina is such a lovely, sincere, committed, pleasant Christian young lady. Our family just grew to love and appreciate her very quickly. And this past September, on September 8, she turned 25. She loves children. As she can find the funds, she's going to school, training to be a teacher. The Georgian Mission Secretary, Elder Charaya, had graciously made arrangements for us to stay in the Union President's apartment, which just happened to be vacant while we were there. How did we meet Irina? Well, they had employed her to kind of take care of it. It's a church, it's the mission office, it's the union office, and they have apartments where seminary students come and do practical training. They hired her to kind of just, keep it clean and check people in and out and give out keys and stuff like that for a year. And then they said, we don't have any money for this position anymore. So I'm sorry, we can't hire you anymore. But she's just continued to do it as a volunteer for the last year. Comes from very humble background, very limited resources. He said to her, Irina, how do you survive? How do you make it? How do you get by? And she is such a positive, simple, trusting God. And she just says, God always provides. And we're like, yeah, but how does God provide? How is this going to work? We're all worried about it. And she's like, you know what? It's okay. God always provides. So when we went there, all she had to do was give us a key and tell us, where to go nicely. And yet instead she offered to be our full-time tour guide. She offered to go with us anywhere we wanted, help us see things. She also was baptized by Pastor Hart when she was younger. She's been very active in the church. She works with flag camps, which are like summer day camps. She has got to the point now where she's one of the co-leaders of those. She does breathe-free seminars to help people stop smoking. It's kind of interesting, through one of those programs, her dad stopped smoking for a year. And then he went back to smoking, not because he had a desire or a craving to smoke, but because of the intense peer pressure of his friends. They were just at him all the time for a year. What's wrong with you? You're not a real Georgian man if you don't smoke. So he finally went back to smoking, which is kind of sad. But she is very active. That's a huge Ferris wheel we went on. She's very active in the church, has continued to serve God using her gifts. And what did we do for dear Irina in return? Well, we helped her experience some firsts in her life. We helped her get her first ever donut. I don't know where it is. I was going to tell you this, that's the Georgian police car. I don't really have time to tell you this, but I'm going to tell you anyways because I think it's so interesting. All these police are we're walking down the road, and there's police going by, lights going, I'm like, wow, there must be a lot of criminals. They're like chasing people left, right, and center. And I said, like, whoa, who are they going after? And she's like, well, usually they're going after people that littered, or in this one particular case, the lights were on and the police were talking through their loudspeaker, and I'm like, well, what's going on? And she's like, they're telling people that they need to drive faster or else they're going to get a ticket. And the people there, you've got to be there to understand the irony of that. I mean, people drive like raving lunatics. They're like nobody's driving slow, but you got the police ripping down the road saying, got to drive faster, you're going to get a ticket. Like, when are you going to see that in Canada? Can you imagine? Will everybody please drive faster? I just thought that was interesting. So she helped. We would have never known that without her. We would have just thought, oh, they're catching lots of criminals. But the most important thing, so we took her to McDonald's for the first time. We got her in a bumper car for the first time. We had no mercy on her. Actually, Dunkin' Donuts, if you're going to learn to swim, just be thrown in with the sharks. We gave her no mercy. But the most important thing that I want to do for Irina, my friend Irina, is what I'm going to do right now, and that is to earnestly ask you to pray for her. Because we were utterly shocked and horrified on October 2, just a few weeks ago, when we received a message from Pastor Griegel, pastor of the Philadelphia congregation, indicating that Irina had recently become very sick. She had some pain in her neck for a few days. They thought, oh, she has a cold. But then she got so that she was having difficulty moving. And then on the last day of September, she got worse to the point where she could hardly breathe. They rushed her to the emergency. The doctors determined she had a cancerous growth inside the spinal cord in her neck area, blocking the connection between her brain and the rest of her body. And when he sent that message, she said she is now paralyzed and on artificial life support. And we were just shocked because we're like, how can that be? 5 weeks ago, we were walking all over Kingdom Come with this lady, climbing up these ancient fortress ruins. Very health-conscious young lady, very careful about what she eats, very, physically active. And I know I've already shared this with prayer and fast group, and I've shared it with the prayer meeting crew, and I want to thank everybody who has been praying for her and everybody who has asked, hey, how's she doing? And by the way, Pastor Grisha said to please express thanks for those of you that have been praying for her. But I want to invite everyone here, the more the merrier, to lift her up in prayer. Just this Monday we received an update indicating that it is being determined that she has hemangioblastoma. I'm probably not saying that right, but we looked that up a bit and it's not good. It is not a good picture. Irina cannot breathe independently. Doctors, a couple of days previous to that, gave her a tracheostomy, and after that she started to eat a little bit. And then on Wednesday, we received a further update that Irina had started to speak a little bit. Those are very encouraging things, but her situation is still extremely critical. And I accept that we live in an unfair, sin-wrecked world, and I understand that God sees a way bigger perspective picture than I can ever begin to comprehend. And I hold to his promise to be able to work good out of every situation for his people. But with that context, from my limited human viewpoint, I just feel like the Adventist Church in Tbilisi in Georgia needs a faithful, active young witness like Irina. I think they need her. And so in the context of submission to God's loving will, I am praying that God will intervene with the miracle of healing for Irina when and if he sees fit. Talked about some miracle stories. God does all kinds of different miracles. I know he can do this one. He'll do it if it's the right thing. And so I invite you to join me in lifting up Irina in prayer. I was really blessed by the stories and testimonies that were shared with me and with my family as we were on vacation. I hope that they're of some Christian encouragement to you. Reviewing these stories brought to mind 3 lessons that I'll end with. First one, do what you can for God's kingdom. You know, it's not always easy to witness for God. It's not always easy to take a stand for God. But be inspired by the courage and the initiative and the creativity and the willingness of these fellow Adventist Christians. Number 2, remember that you never know who may be open to the good news of the gospel and the Adventist message. You know, it can be easy to jump to the conclusion that those who are successful and rich and famous or highly skilled, they probably wouldn't be interested in this whole Adventist lifestyle thing. And meeting Mate reminded me powerfully that God desires everyone's salvation. He reads the hearts and minds. I don't know. So I need to be careful to not write people off as uninterested just because I think they're uninterested. I don't know if they're interested or not. So I need to be careful. And these stories provide a wonderful lesson in the importance of perseverance in prayer. Don't give up praying for those you love. Don't give up praying for your family members. It was 12 years before Irma and her church family saw any results with Mate. And people always have a choice, and you can pray for people your whole life, and they may not choose God. Their father didn't choose God. He was angry till the day he died. 3 other sisters haven't made that choice yet. But others did respond. Mate responded, and Mary responded, and Tina, the mom, responded. And since we really can't know who will and who won't, that means that we need to just keep praying, right? Just keep praying. Colossians 4:2 says, continue earnestly in prayer, being vigilant in it with thanksgiving. And I think it's summed up best by the scripture reading we started with. Romans 12:11 and 12 says, not lagging in diligence, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing steadfastly in prayer. May we be encouraged by the examples of God's miracle-working power in other people so that we can recognize his miracle-working power in our lives as well.